Hello, YouTubers. This is Robert Byzantine5, and welcome to another episode of Magic the History. We're going to travel through the blind eternities to Dominaria and its early existence. We are going to discuss the Thran. The Thran were an interesting society of people. They were a. Let me consult my script here because I'm getting senile in my old age. I actually stayed up all night typing this up. It's kind of a synopsis of, and no, I didn't use Wikipedia. It's a synopsis of the entire book. Spent going back through the whole thing and things like that. So it's actually quite a pain in the butt. Anyway, uh, so what we're gonna do is we'll kind of just start from the beginning. The Thran were basically a utopian society. They encompassed what did I write down here? They were the Thran were a utopian culture of humans whose technology level was much more advanced than any other Dominarians. The artifact devices ran on power stones, which had stable artificial planes in them. They were introduced in the Urza's Saga set, which with such cards as Thran Quarry, Thran Dynamo, and blah blah blah. The Thran were basically like the Atlanteans of Dominaria. Their culture encompassed. It was like it wasn't. They weren't as vast as say their when they were around. It wasn't as vast as say Ravnica. If anyone's familiar with Ravnica, the Ravnica block, it is a plane, but is entirely covered by a city. Um, it's basically it's just a city planet with like interspersed things in the cities. Oh, excuse me. In the Thran, their most of their stuff took place on their capital city of Halic. I'm going to brutalize this. It's Halcyon, I think is how it's pronounced. I'm not sure. It's like Halcyon, I think. Uh, yeah, Halcyon, Halcyon. And it was like the central. It was like the Atlantis of Dominaria type thing. The Thran were they were very very advanced. They were mostly artificers. They had constructs that did their work, golems and things like that. I guess is what you'd want to call them, but they were more like android type constructs that ran on these power stones that had self-contained planes of existence in them, and they were just these powerful little batteries of sorts. And what's his name? Glacian. Glacian was the main. He made like the the best power stones, I guess. I mean, he was like the Rolex of power stones. He made those. His wife was I believe she was a. Bear in mind, I'm quite a few books beyond this now. I believe she was a doctor of some sorts. So I can't remember her name though. But the Thran, they had all sorts of really crazy things. There was what's it called? I have it written down. I mean, one of the things they built. Oh, where is it? Oh, they built something called the Null Moon. Um, it was basically like a big outpost that was spherical, and it was like they could move it over battlefields, and it was like a command station type thing, and it was a weapon, and it dropped these power stone weapons and things like that, and it would deploy troops, and sky ships could land there. It was just big giant floating city thing. I mean, that's how advanced they were. It was super crazy. Like if you read this book, it is a really good book, The Thran by J. Robert King. Um, it goes very in depth on and just into the Thran and their society and whatnot. And in the Thran, you're introduced to Yawgmoth, who is an exiled healer from um, Halcyon. I believe he was exiled because he wanted to practice things differently than the way the Thran did. The Thran used the Power Stones and things of that nature, but Yawgmoth wanted to use machines and all these other things. And in the beginning of the Thran, Glacian is actually working on the power stones themselves are first a giant power stone, and then they're splintered into perfect little power stones by varying sizes to do different things. Uh, the what were they called? Do 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 do. Oh, the Untouchables. They're basically lepers. Their sentence was to there was caves under Halcyon that they were, which later in later history are called the Caves of Koilos, but they're called the Caves of the Damned during the Thran Empire. And these lepers, as they were kept down there to do manual labor and be imprisoned and things like that. They rebel, and well, Glacian is working on probably his greatest power stone ever. They kind of throw a monkey wrench into the procedure, and something happens, and there's an explosion, and Glacian he's injured. He gets a chunk of the power stone embedded in him, and a disease called Phyrexia is caused, which we later come to know as the process of which a person becomes a Phyrexian. The Phyrexia itself is this disease that they try all their healing abilities on, they're using all their magic and whatnot, and they can't cure. And Yawgmoth comes up and says, "Hey, I've got this cure," and it's basically a bunch of different metals in this solution and things like that, and other different things that blocks the flow of mana through the person's body that prevents the disease from spreading. He actually ends up calling the disease Phyrexia instead of Phyresis, so it's really interesting. But here, let me actually read what I have written on the script. The Thran Empire, centered in the capital city of Halcyon, encompassed much of the main planet of the plane of Dominaria. Their culture was idyllic and pacifistic, and the Thran people lived very lush and comfortable lives. This all changed when a group of rebellious untouchables, people who had been exiled from Halcyon to live and die in the caves of the damned for one reason or another, attacked the city's mana rig, a power source effectively situated in a volcanic crevice above the caves of the damned, which later became the caves of Koilos. And below the city of Halcyon, the genius of Halcyon, a man named Glacian, was hurt in the raid on the mana rig and contracted a disease which none of the city's healers were able to cure. Their arcane healing magic only worsened the disease. That's the thing, is the original Phyrexia disease fed on mana. That's the one thing I forgot to add. It fed on their mana. It was and it just got worse and worse and worse. And Glacian was actually effectively the first Phyrexian, because later on in the story he has all these tubes attached to him that Yawgmoth, and all these other things that Yawgmoth puts in him, and he becomes the first Phyrexian of sorts, which is it's really interesting how they describe it. They don't the Phyrexians in the Thran book aren't what we are used to. They weren't creations of the oil. They were altered beings, basically. They were modified beings, modified Thran, and modified dwarves, and modified elves, and whatnot. And, later on evolved into, as we know it, like, we'll get into Gix and Zancha, I think is how you say it, and we'll get into that in the Urza stuff. The original Praetors, being Gix and a couple others. So they were a little bit more close to what we know Phyrexians as, because Yawgmoth gets locked on the plane of Phyrexia and things get all screwy. And it's funny too, because the plane in the book is described as this really, it's a beautiful place, and then Yawgmoth corrupts it. So anyway, the Thran began to suffer from this disease known as Phyresis. The disease that Glacian contracts becomes contagious. It's really weird. It becomes a plague. And and then that's when Yawgmoth kind of sweeps in. He comes into the caravan of people who are outcasts, and he sees his opportunity. He's a snake oil salesman, basically. Known as Phyresis, which an ex-Thran healer named Yawgmoth determined was caused by the power stones which the city ran on. The disease changed the way the Thran Empire worked. It spread like a plague, and Yawgmoth had the only known cure, a serum consisting of metal components in solution which blocked the flow of mana through the body. a process called Phyrexis. Yawgmoth became the hero of Halcyon for discovering a way to fight the new disease and gain political power from it. Yawgmoth, driven primarily by a desire for power, used his campaign against the Phyresis to manipulate things in his favor and eventually gain control of the Thran capital city of Halcyon. During the quest for power, he took control of the plane named Phyrexia. A plane he named Phyrexia for the term Phyrexis, which meant regeneration. Yeah, originally it was he took the Phyresis and changed it to with his cure it became Phyrexis, and people would regenerate from it, but they were regenerating in weird ways. Like, it's really interesting. He got so drunk with power, and I mean Glacian and his wife attempt just mainly his wife, and he falls in love with Glacian's wife at some point. Um, I believe she does him, but ends up seeing him for who he really is. um, so I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, no, it's interesting. The Phyrexians can heal themselves. I mean, that was one of the things in the sets is and they heal themselves and then they spread their disease and whatnot. The Thran-Phyrexian War began when Yawgmoth returned to conquer the Thran and the Plain of Dominaria. Yawgmoth, in control of the city of Halcyon and its elite guard, along with his new army of Phyrexians, waged war against the Thran coalition that opposed him. During this battle, Yawgmoth took control of the Null Moon, a giant movable structure which could control all the artifacts in the Thran. That's right. The Null Moon also was like kind of a remote control and shut off for all of the artifacts in the Thran Empire. If you turned off the Null Moon or flipped a switch in there or whatever, like the sky ships would fall out of the sky, the constructs would stop moving, or you could turn them on their original controllers. Like suddenly the constructs would turn on the people who they were supposed to be fighting for, not against. It's really interesting too. Like the opening sequence in the book, The Thran, Yawgmoth is hiding underground, actually, in these ramps that are dug out in these little pits, and they're covered up to look like the ground is solid. With a whole construct of army and Phyrexians, he's in this hovering throne that's controlled by Power Stones. It's like Professor X's chair from the X-Men. It hovers above ground. It's got like lasers and whatnot. And it's really crazy that this whole battle sequence that happens. I mean, there's giant mantis constructs and these dwarves and whatnot. It's really cool. I can't stress how cool this book is. And Yawgmoth used the Null Moon to drop Power Stone charges. They were great doomsday weapons, which suck the energy off the land and everything on it or around it to charge a single Power Stone. Yawgmoth was finally defeated when he and his followers were sealed in Phyrexia by a portal device powered by a Power Stone. For the Thran, the victory was the victory was short-lived. Their civilization had been damaged too greatly to recover and soon collapsed. The war that's where the Thran Empire fell and fractured, and then they all kind of spread to the four winds type thing, and then you end up with the Balduvians, the Gelderans, and all these other cultures. At this point, the Yawgmoth had actually created the gateway to Phyrexia in the Caves of the Damned, which was actually turned into a kind of research area for him. Actually, he was basically Dr. Mengele for the Thran, and he experimented on the Thran and whatnot. And the only constructed gate to Phyrexia was in the Caves of the Damned, Caves of Koilos, and was sealed by the Might and the Meek Stone. And later on, we'll discuss, Urza and Mishra and their journey with Tukasia and the Caves of Koilos and the explorations, and they find the Caves of the Damned, and they find the Power Stones, the Might and the Meek Stone, and they take them, and all this other stuff. Yawgmoth does eventually return, hence is where we get the whole thing with Urza and whatnot. Thousands of years later, all that was left of the Thran were their advanced artifacts, which was scavenged by later civilizations for study. Two such salvagers, the brothers Urza and Mishra, researched their remnants, and during a visit to the caves of Koilos, the power stone powering the device sealing Phyrexia was broken. Each brother received a half of the power stone, named the Might and the Weak Stone, and their greed for both halves of the stone and their animosity for each other eventually led to the brothers' war. Much later, the opening of the gate to Phyrexia would lead to another Phyrexian invasion of Dominaria, and that was the Phyrexian invasion of Dominaria was way more catastrophic than the Thran-Phyrexian war. Uh, if anyone is familiar with the card Urborg, the Tomb of Yawgmoth, most of the world ends up looking like Urborg. It Dominaria is so vastly destroyed. I mean, most of you are mainly familiar with the Scars of Mirrodin block. Mirrodin besieged New Phyrexia and how Mirrodin came to look like Phyrexia. Mirrodin was basically like what happened to Mirrodin happened to the original plane of Phyrexia. The original plane of Phyrexia was a beautiful place, and then Yawgmoth went there for periods of time and became manipulated it to his will. He had this whole like I don't know, just like factory thing built, and he people would go there and they become Phyrexians, and it's really 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 cool. But so the Thran themselves were basically an Atlantean society that put their trust in Yawgmoth and were brought down by him. And through that, the original Phyresis disease, which was just originally a plague that kind of thrived on mana, was born, and it was a very unfortunate side effect to Glacian being infected by a power stone. Um, so yeah, I'm glad you sat and watched this video. I'm going to be going on to the Brothers War after this. If you have send me your comments and whatnot. If you want to know more of the Thran, I recommend reading once again The Thran by J. Robert King. Really good book. So once again, this has been Robert Brizendine 5 with Magic the History. So like, favorite, and subscribe.